Welcome, Argan now.
In a house where sense is flown and casseroles a danger zone, where parents plot from garden sheds and children rule with PowerPoint threads. All the toast is jammed, the rota's gone, the dog's in charge, the scones are wrong. You'll find no calm, no tidy throng, just bickering played out far too long. It's just slightly wrong, but terribly right, like tea at noon spiked with a fight, a family feud, a comedic fright. They'll burn the roast and still ignite laughter every night. The toast is jammed, the rota's gone.
I cooked yesterday, Arthur. It was that chicken thing, the one you said tasted like a vulcanized tire that had been marinated in despair. It was your turn. The rota, which you so brilliantly devised on that spreadsheet you're so proud of, a document of such staggering complexity it would baffle the minds at Bletchley Park, states quite clearly, Wednesday, Arthur, casserole. And here we are, Wednesday, Arthur, and not a casserole in sight. Just you, standing there looking like a startled garden gnome who's forgotten his fishing rod.
The scene opens in a moderately well-kept yet demonstrably chaotic suburban kitchen. Arthur Fawlty, a man whose ambition vastly outstrips his competence, is locked in a verbal standoff with his wife Martha. Martha, a woman of steely resolve and perpetually frayed nerves, brandishes a spatula like a conductor's baton, directing her symphony of scorn. The air is thick with tension, and the faint, ominous smell of something electrical beginning to think about burning. Their children, the unnervingly astute Chloe and the deceptively placid Leo, are watching from the doorway, observing the proceedings with the detached curiosity of wildlife documentarians studying a doomed species. Arthur puffed out his chest, a pathetic attempt at asserting authority that was immediately undercut by his flustered expression. It's not a question of whose turn it is, Martha, it's a question of culinary aptitude. My talents, as you well know, are geared towards the grander, more conceptual side of gastronomy, strategic flavor pairings, theoretical saucemanship. You, on the other hand, you're very good at the practical application of heat to food-like substances. It's a simple matter of deploying the correct asset for the task at hand. You wouldn't ask a poet to fix the plumbing, would you? As Arthur launched into his nonsensical tirade, he gesticulated wildly towards the toaster, which had a forgotten crumpet jammed deep within its metallic gullet. A thin wisp of smoke began to curl upwards. Furthermore, he continued, blissfully unaware, my casserole concept for this evening was a deconstructed classic, a postmodern interpretation that would challenge the very notion of what a casserole is. It required a level of focus I simply cannot achieve with this constant nagging. He punctuated the last word with a jab of his finger, accidentally knocking a can of aerosol air freshener onto the now glowing toaster. A small, yet surprisingly aggressive jet of flame erupted, igniting a nearby tea towel with startling alacrity. The fire itself was less of a raging inferno and more of a pathetic, smoky embarrassment. It was extinguished quickly with a bowl of Leo's half-eaten cornflakes and milk, which only served to add the lingering aroma of burnt sugar to the acrid stench of melted plastic. The aftermath, however, was biblical in its scope. Just as Arthur and Martha were bickering over whose fault the soggy blackened mess was, the doorbell rang with the imperious chime of doom.
Arthur, Martha, we heard there was a domestic incident.
Lionel boomed, striding into the hallway as if he owned it. He surveyed the smoky kitchen with the air of a health and safety inspector who had just won the lottery.
You poor things. To think of the children exposed to such flammable incompetence. It's a miracle they weren't completely incinerated. We came as soon as we heard the smoke alarm on the Neighborhood Watch app.
Lionel cleared his throat, producing a sheaf of papers from his briefcase with a flourish worthy of a stage magician.
Now, no need for panic. As you know, following your previous incident involving the lawnmower and Mrs. Higgins' prize-winning petunias, the family solicitor and I thought it prudent to draw up a contingency plan. A sort of emergency protocol for moments of profound and continued ineptitude. It's all perfectly legal. a temporary guardianship clause, to be enacted in the event of gross parental negligence, such as, for instance, setting fire to the kitchen while arguing about a casserole.
Arthur's face, already pale, turned a shade of translucent grey. Guardianship? Negligence? It was a minor tea towel incident, a flash in the pan, literally.
You've been waiting for this, haven't you, Beverly? Hovering like a vulture in cheap perfume, just waiting for us to slip up.
Someone has to think of the children, Martha, and clearly it isn't you two. Now, Lionel dear, I think we should start by airing the place out, and then a complete inventory of the gin.
While the adults were embroiled in their legalistic squabbling, Chloe and Leo exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated glee. This was not a disaster, it was a coup. It was the moment their small domestic world had been turned upside down, and they had landed squarely on top. As Lionel and Beverly began issuing orders, confiscating car keys, and discussing the implementation of a new household management structure, the children watched their parents' authority crumble into dust. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been utterly annihilated, leaving a vacuum that the two young Machiavellis were more than ready to fill.
Right? Since you two are technically in charge of the legal framework now, Leo and I will handle day-to-day operations. Dad, you're on dish duty, indefinitely. Mum, you're in charge of laundry, but you are not to use the high-temperature wash. We've lost too many good socks to your scorched earth cleaning policy.
The sheer audacity of the command left Arthur and Martha speechless, their mouths opening and closing like beached fish.
I've drafted a new schedule of responsibilities. Chloe is Director of Sustenance and Entertainment. I am the Minister for Logistics and Compliance. Mom and Dad are interns. Your duties will include cleaning our shoes, fetching us snacks on demand, and not speaking unless spoken to. Any failure to comply will be reported directly to the interim management.
The demoted parents could only stare in horror. Their home, their castle, had been overrun, not by the bickering relatives who were merely a catalyst, but by their own offspring. Chloe and Leo moved with terrifying efficiency, delegating tasks, rewriting house rules, and generally behaving as if they had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. The era of parental authority was over. The reign of the junior junta had begun, and its first decrees were clear. More screen time, a later bedtime, and a complete ban on any foodstuff described as wholesome or good for you.
Explain slightly wrong. Narrator. A few days into the new regime, Arthur and Martha were huddled in the garden shed, a location they had chosen for its distinct lack of child-sized tyrants and smug leopard print-clad relatives. The shed smelled of rust, damp soil, and desperation. Arthur was pacing back and forth, a wild look in his eye, while Martha sat on an upturned bucket, sharpening a garden trowel with a flinty-eyed determination. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a burning, all-consuming desire to reclaim their rightful place at the top of the household food chain. Their first attempt had to be subtle, a psychological masterstroke. "Right," Arthur whispered, his voice a conspiratorial hiss. "We can't use force. They have the law and Lionel on their side. We must use guile. We'll fight fire with passive-aggressive incompetence." He stopped pacing and pointed a dirt-stained finger at Martha. "Here's the plan. We follow their orders, but we do everything just slightly wrong. Not wrong enough to be accused of deliberate sabotage, but wrong enough to cause maximum irritation. We will become the most infuriatingly inept interns the world has ever seen. They'll be begging us to take control again within a week."
For example, Arthur elaborated, warming to his theme, when Chloe asked for a sandwich. You make it, but you cut it into a bizarre, unmanageable number of tiny, unequal pieces. When Leo asks you to polish his shoes, you polish them to a brilliant shine on the inside. When they ask for the television remote, you hand them the one for the old video recorder we haven't used since 2003. It's death by 1,000 tiny, maddening cuts. Their first opportunity came that evening. Chloe, in her role as Director of Sustenance, demanded spaghetti bolognese and don't be stingy with the parmesan. Arthur and Martha exchanged a look of grim purpose. They retreated to the kitchen, now under the watchful eye of Beverly, who was sipping a large gin and tonic. They followed the recipe to the letter, except for one crucial detail. Instead of ground beef, Arthur meticulously minced an entire head of cabbage, while Martha boiled the spaghetti for precisely 45 minutes, reducing it to a starchy, gelatinous paste. The resulting meal looked vaguely like the original dish, but tasted of disappointment and boiled brassica. So the cabbage bolognese was actually a moderate success. It didn't exactly win them back control of the house, but it did result in Chloe declaring that she would be reviewing their culinary privileges. This small victory, well, it really emboldened Arthur.
His next plan was definitely more ambitious, targeting the very heart of the new regime's social structure, Beverly's precious afternoon tea.
I had instituted a daily 4 p.m. ritual of tea and scones, inviting my equally dreadful friends, creating, a proper coven of gossip and judgment right there in the living room.
Arthur decided this was the perfect theatre for his next act of domestic warfare.
She wants scones, Martha? We shall give her scones, Arthur declared, back in the shed-based command center. But these will be scones with a secret ingredient. He produced a small, unassuming bottle from his pocket, extra-strength laxative drops. Odorless, colorless, and recommended by my doctor for, well, never mind that. We'll bake a batch of the most delicious-looking scones imaginable, but one of them, the largest, most perfect one, destined for Beverly's plate, will be enhanced. The ensuing chaos will shatter her social standing and prove she cannot manage this household.
I harbored a deep and abiding hatred for Beverly's smug superiority, so I agreed without hesitation. The plan was put into motion.
Martha, surprisingly competent as a baker when motivated by pure spite, produced a tray of scones that were golden, fluffy, and honestly, utterly irresistible. Under the guise of adding a decorative dusting of icing sugar, Arthur carefully administered the drops to the plumpest scone on the tray.
We presented the tray to Beverly just as her guests, 2 formidable-looking women named Prudence and Deirdre, were settling onto the sofa.
But the plan had a fatal flaw. Leo, the Minister for Logistics and Compliance, ever watchful, had observed the clandestine activity in the kitchen.
As Beverly reached for her specially prepared scone, Leo swooped in.
Oh, Uncle Lionel, you must try this one, I exclaimed, snatching the loaded scone from the plate and handing it to Lionel, who had just entered the room. Mom and Dad made them especially. This one looks the best.
Before Arthur could protest, Lionel, flattered by the attention, had taken an enormous bite. The look of horror on Arthur's face was matched only by the look of smug satisfaction on Leo's. The scone incident resulted in Uncle Lionel spending an unscheduled and deeply traumatic 48 hours in close proximity to the upstairs bathroom, effectively removing him from his self-appointed position of authority. This left Beverly in sole command, a prospect that terrified Arthur more than anything. His plans were becoming increasingly desperate, veering from psychological warfare into the realm of high-tech surveillance. He was convinced that if he could just gather concrete evidence of the children's tyranny and Beverly's gin-soaked mismanagement, he could present it to a higher authority, perhaps the United Nations, and have his parental rights reinstated.
They won't believe our word against theirs.
Arthur announced this to Martha in the dead of night, gesturing to a collection of electronic components spread across the garage floor.
We need proof, irrefutable video evidence.
He held up a tiny camera no bigger than a button.
I bought a set of these online. Spy cameras. We'll plant them around the house. One in the living room, one in the kitchen, maybe one on the dog. We'll monitor their every move from the shed. We will build a dossier of their incompetence that will be undeniable.
Martha looked at the mess of wires and tiny lenses with profound skepticism.
Arthur, you can barely operate the television remote. You think you can orchestrate a multi-camera surveillance operation from a shed that has one electrical socket and is currently occupied by a family of spiders?
Her doubts were, as usual, entirely justified. Arthur's technical skills were rudimentary at best. He spent the next day furtively planting the cameras, hiding one in a ceramic owl on the mantelpiece, another inside a hollowed-out loaf of bread in the kitchen, and a third taped precariously to the collar of their bewildered golden retriever, Binky. The initial results were promising, if grainy. From his shed-based monitor, Arthur watched Leo confiscate his favorite armchair and Chloe replace his classical music CDs with something she called hyper-pop. He saw Beverly topping up her tea with a healthy slug of Gordon's gin. It was all there. The evidence was mounting.
You see, Martha, it's working,
he crowed, fiddling with a loose wire.
All I need to do now is figure out how to record this footage and not just broadcast it. There's a slight issue with the output signal configuration.
As he twisted 2 wires together, the monitor flickered and went blank. Arthur's technical know-how was, to put it mildly, lacking. In his attempt to route the camera feeds to a recording device, he had not, as he believed, created a closed-circuit system. Instead, by a stroke of spectacular electronic misfortune, he'd accidentally cross-wired the spy camera's wireless transmitter with the signal booster for the neighborhood's new smart home network. He had effectively created his own highly localized pirate television station, a station whose signal was being beamed directly to every smart television, tablet, and Wi-Fi-enabled refrigerator within a 3-block radius. The star of this impromptu broadcast was, of course, Arthur himself. Unaware that his face was currently appearing on the screen of Mrs. Higgins' smart microwave next door, Arthur stared at his blank monitor in frustration.
Right, that's it. The gloves are off.
He raged, pacing the confines of the shed.
They think they can win. They think they can defeat me, Arthur Fawlty. I, who single-handedly assembled the flat-pack barbecue. I, who successfully navigated the M25 on a bank holiday weekend. This is my house, my castle. I will not be defeated by a 14-year-old despot, a 12-year-old bureaucrat, and a gin-addled harpy in last season's leopard print.
His tirade continued, growing in volume and intensity. He ranted about the injustice of it all. He lamented his lost authority. He performed a scathing and frankly quite cruel impression of Beverly trying to open a jar of pickles. He kicked an innocent bag of potting soil, sending a cloud of dirt into the air. The entire undignified, pathetic meltdown was being broadcast in crystal-clear high definition to his neighbors who were watching, utterly transfixed from the comfort of their own living rooms. The Fawlty family's private chaos had just gone spectacularly public. The first sign that something was amiss was when his phone began to buzz incessantly with messages from the neighborhood watch group chat.
Arthur, are you all right?
Read one message.
Fascinating monologue. Very raw.
Read another from the local amateur dramatics society director. The final crushing realization came when Martha burst into the shed, her face a mask of pure horror.
Arthur, you're on. You're on everything. Mrs. Higgins just asked if you need a cup of tea and a lie-down.
The public broadcast of Arthur's meltdown was the final straw. Humiliation hung over the Fawlty household like a thick fog. Beverly was mortified that her gin consumption had been alluded to so publicly. Lionel, having finally emerged from the bathroom, was appalled at the damage to the family's reputation. Even Chloe and Leo seemed to grasp that things had perhaps gone too far. A summit was called. The warring factions gathered around the dining room table, the air thick with recrimination and the lingering smell of shame. It was here that a truce was improbably declared.
This has all gotten rather out of hand. Public broadcasts of emotional distress, laxative-related incidents. It's not befitting of our family. Perhaps the temporary guardianship was a touch hasty.
Yes, maybe we should return to the previous arrangement.
For a brief shining moment, it seemed as though order might be restored. Arthur and Martha, sensing victory, tried to look magnanimous. Chloe and Leo, sensing their power slipping, looked mutinous. A peace treaty was hastily drafted by Leo on the back of a pizza menu. It stated that Arthur and Martha would resume their parental duties. Lionel and Beverly would retreat to a purely advisory role, and the spy cameras would be dismantled and destroyed. Hands were shaken. A fragile and entirely temporary peace settled over the house.
So what's for dinner?
I will finally be making my deconstructed postmodern casserole.
Ugh, I'd rather eat the potting soil.
The alliances immediately reformed, the battle lines were redrawn, and the shouting began anew. Martha declared she would rather eat the potting soil from the shed. Leo began drafting a new list of grievances, and Beverly was seen quietly unscrewing the lid on the gin bottle. The peace had been nothing more than a brief ceasefire in a war that was clearly far from over. The failed truce did not return the family to its previous state of dysfunction. Instead, it created an entirely new and far more chaotic form of equilibrium. The official power structure had been notionally restored to Arthur and Martha, but in reality it was gone forever. Their authority was a joke, a punchline that the entire neighborhood was now in on. They were parents in name only, figureheads in a monarchy run by a ruthless committee of their own children and meddling relatives who now felt they had a permanent stake in the running of the household.
We're not just kids anymore. We're basically consultants in household management.
Yeah, and Mom and Dad are our least favorite clients.
The house now operates in a state of perpetual low-grade warfare. Chloe and Leo, having tasted power, now run a sophisticated black market in household privileges, trading screen time for chores and favorable snacks for silence during adult arguments. They are no longer children. They are freelance consultants in domestic management, and their parents are their most difficult, non-compliant clients.
I say, Beverly, do you think Martha's dusting has improved at all?
Not in the slightest, Lionel. And Arthur's finances. Don't even get me started.
Lionel and Beverly never truly left. They relinquished their official guardianship but installed themselves as a permanent, unelected oversight committee. They pop in unannounced to conduct spot checks, critique Martha's dusting, and offer unsolicited advice on everything from Arthur's finances to the dog's grooming schedule. They are less relatives, and more a pair of deeply unhelpful ghosts who have forgotten they are supposed to be haunting somewhere else, constantly stirring the pot and undermining Arthur and Martha's every move.
Arthur, that barbecue is never going to fit in the garden.
The play ends not with a resolution, but with an escalation. Arthur, in a desperate bid to reassert his masculinity after the broadcast incident, has bought a ridiculously oversized barbecue that barely fits in the garden. He is trying to assemble it using instructions written in Swedish while Martha criticizes his technique from an upstairs window.
I'm putting a fiver on it, collapsing before he even lights it.
I'm live streaming this one, guys.
Well, Beverly, this is better than telly.
Cheers, Lionel, to chaos.
This is their life now, a headless, hopeless, hilarious mess, forever teetering on the brink of another.
We'll Camargue now.
In a house where sense is flown and Casseroles a danger zone, where parents plot from garden sheds and children rule with PowerPoint threads. All the toast is jammed, the road is gone, the dog's in charge, the scones are wrong. You'll find no calm, no tidy throng, just bickering played